one can find a voice that is completely unique in the progressive rock community, known for its intricate rhythms, deep philosophical lyrics, and exceptional technical proficiency. It lacks the explosive power of Freddie Mercury, the mysticism of Peter Gabriel, and the thunder of Ian Gillan. It instead flies otherworldly, with an androgynous quality reminiscent of a cosmic mist that descends to Earth. Not only is Jon Anderson the driving force behind the band, yes, but his voice also represents a musical ideology that most people in the modern world have long since forgotten. When it comes to rock, Jon Anderson isn't your average guy. Neither does he engage in sex with women, make sexually suggestive remarks, or destroy hotel rooms. Not only does he not utilize social media, he also does not have a publicity team or pursue fame. Like a nomadic monk in a secular society, he makes his living and creates art while his voice echoes through the din. Anderson sees music as more than just a pleasurable diversion. Entrances into illogical realms can be found through this gateway. Rather than being a passive observer, the listener takes on the role of a spiritual traveler in these worlds, where they can soar over space and time, decipher long-forgotten symbols, and even just sit quietly and breathe with the cosmos. But that very mentality led to his dismissal from the band he had created and the accusation that he was a man bewildered by his own spiritual path. Instead of getting into arguments, Jon Anderson persisted in his writing, singing, and meditation, and he allowed time to decide. Then, what factors contributed to Jon Anderson's identity? Is there a secret to the success of Awaken and dozens of other enduring musical epics by a poor Lancashire milk delivery lad who had asthma since childhood? After wandering for over 50 years with music, faith, love, or just the echoes of an idealist who refuses to grow up, what is left? If you're open to hearing it, Jon Anderson's life is like a symphony that doesn't need a crescendo. A little faith, some introspection, and a deep breath are all that's needed. Earlier years. The little industrial town of Accrington in Lancashire, England, where Jon Anderson was born on October 25, 1944, was known for its coal dust streets and infrequent sunshine. He was born John Roy Anderson, but he decided to shorten his name without the H so he could feel more free and open. You could feel a little bit of his character, a man who was perpetually yearning for liberation, in the very sound of his name. He came from a very modest family. His dad painted houses and dabbled in music, playing mandolin and singing traditional Irish songs. His mom was a realist, a stickler for discipline, and a hard worker. With 5 siblings and a cramped home, John, the middle kid, could only find solace in silence when faced with one particular challenge. Music. Aside from music, nothing else prompted me to pause and pay attention. A lavender mist hung in the air, enveloping my thoughts. According to his recollection, he felt it even though no one else could see it. Football was John's lifelong ambition, even when he was a little boy. He even tried out for a youth team in his area because he was a Manchester United fanatic. That aspiration was dashed, though, by his persistent asthma. I still vividly recall passing out on the field, gasping for air. I felt like I belonged someplace else and realized I couldn't play football that day. Like him, he didn't belong in school. Anderson was frequently scolded for daydreaming in class, had trouble paying attention in class, and resented rules. He did odd jobs like milking cows and working in a cigarette factory after dropping out of school at the age of 15. He delved further into an inner realm populated by Celtic mythology, classical music, and ethereal dreams as a result of his monotonous work and the gloomy, wet days of Lancashire. John learned to play the piano, organ, and saxophone on his own, even though he never had any official training in music. I was clueless as to what each chord was called. I attempted to play whichever way I could this ribbon of sound that had just sprung into my thoughts. I said, he declared, music wasn't an objective in those days. To him, it was more like a spiritual life raft that he clutched onto while he rode the waves of existence. Jon Anderson's lowly origins, sickness, and lack of education were not, perhaps, his most outstanding traits. That was his talent for spotting exquisite details while others failed to do so. A glimmer of light appeared in the gloomy clouds that hid the manufacturing chimney. The Sunday morning ringing of the church bells carried the rhythm of a different world to him, and he discovered a way to express himself through the sounds of his own language, despite his feelings of alienation. An oral, visual, and spiritual language. Starting out in one's profession. Jon Anderson was a skinny townie with a little voice in the mid-1960s, when the Rolling Stones and the Beatles were causing a musical revolution in Britain, as well as eyes that appeared to be staring up at the sky in a dreamy manner. Nobody gave him a second opportunity in the glitzy rock and roll industry because of his small stature, unusually high voice, and lack of instrumental abilities. However, Anderson held a different opinion. He became a member of the Little Beat band The Warriors in 1965, the same year that his brother Tony Anderson did the same. Anywhere they could get their hands on some cash, the band would play cover songs. This included weddings, drinking parties, nightclubs, and more. They even traveled to Germany to do a performance in the hopes of making it big. But the tour ended subtly, with a sense of letdown. After returning home, the group disbanded due to the indifference of the audiences and the insufficiency of the profits to fund meals. When Anderson returned to England, he was jobless, lost, and broke. He worked odd jobs to make ends meet, doing dishes, serving customers, and moving heavy goods. However, things started to change for the better while he was working at a tiny nightclub in London. Chris Squire, a bassist known for his eccentric approach and meticulous attention to detail, was someone he met there in 1968. While chatting about music, they lamented the monotony of today's top tunes and shared a vision for a revolutionary new sound that would combine classical rock, jazz, and even philosophy. The band Yes was formed after they recruited a drummer, a guitarist, and a keyboardist. "I think so. The simplest and most optimistic word I know is it," Anderson said. When they originally started out, Yes was no different from any of London's other psychedelic rock bands. Both Yes, 1969, and Time and a Word, 1970, their second album, were well received but did not achieve much of an effect. But it was during this time that Anderson started to develop his signature style. Unlike most, he didn't write songs about love, protest, or confessions. Topics covered in his writings included astrophysics, parallel universes, reincarnated spirits, and crystal vibrations. It was deemed foolish by some. Critics said his songs were incomprehensible, and they teased him for it. Chris Squire, however, remained unwavering since he was the sole individual who had faith in Anderson. Bolder musicians were brought in when they overhauled the lineup. Electrified classical guitarist Steve Howe, symphonist Rick Wakeman, and drummer Bill Bruford, who had left Oxford to play in Prague, were all part of the band. There was no missing piece. The esoteric themes and expansive song structures of an obscure band were going to reshape 1970s music. However, Jon Anderson was still a stranger before entering that illustrious period. Not very musically gifted, not very technically adept, not very charismatic as a leader, but with an intuitive heart leading the way, yes, into unknown terrain. An unarmed man whose dreams are his weapon, achieving professional success. With the single Roundabout serving as the album's lead single, Fragile debuted in the fall of 1971. An unusual 8-minute piece that kicked off with what seemed like an alien bass rhythm and a flipped acoustic guitar. It was over that bass that Jon Anderson's soaring voice soared aimlessly, without purpose or goal. The golden age of Yes had begun. When it comes to progressive rock, few albums can compare to 1972's Close to the Edge. In 37 minutes, organized like a symphony with multiple movements, featuring only 3 songs. Jon Anderson was the one who led the way through that ethereal musical terrain. He wanted to be felt, not comprehended. Like poetry or codes, he penned his lyrics. An experience which may summon you from the brink of shame, where you are at your lowest point. Not merely a song, but a rite in its own right. Words didn't have to make sense to Anderson. They simply had to strike the correct chord. It was a religious rite every time they performed live. A journey within each record. On sometimes, he was intolerable because no one else in the band was like him. Jon Anderson has a pathological need for excellence. Before they started recording, he had the band members meditate. Rather than using notes, he used colors to write music. He was nearly a heretic in the 80s rock scene for his aversion to meat, smoking, and alcohol. Indeed, it was this peculiarity that set Yes apart from the rest. Not consumer-friendly, not digestible, not understandable, but intense and unique. Inspired by the Indian Upanishads, the Pinnacle released Tales from Topographic Oceans in 1973, an album with 4 20-minute pieces. Even though the audience and the British music press made fun of it, Anderson remained steadfast. Music, in his view, could stand on its own. Belief was necessary. Yes was tense despite the overwhelming success. The idealist Anderson frequently butted heads with the technical perfectionist Steve Howe and the flamboyant and defiant virtuoso Rick Wakeman. Anderson departed the band for the first time in 1980 following a demanding tour and increasing pressure to produce new material. He embarked on a fresh endeavor, delving into a form of modern art. However, he briefly rejoined Yes, then left again. After a while, he joined Anderson Bruford Wakeman Howe ABWH, which was basically just Yes without the name, along with other former members. Owner of A Lonely Heart, a more contemporary pop rock song from Yes' 1983 album 90125, was an unexpected hit. Anderson wasn't happy with the outcome, even though the song was a tremendous hit on MTV. He felt as though the market had taken a piece of his soul. From that point on, Anderson's career was a never-ending loop of leaving, coming back, reuniting, and breaking. Each time he came back, he brought something different, a more abstract thought, a fresh idea, or even a feeling of estrangement from the band he had started. Yes, it persisted, but on the inside, the vision had become fragmented. Part 6 details Anderson's full ouster in 2008. However, he started to withdraw in 2004. Collaborating with Greek composer Vangelis, famous for his scores to Blade Runner and Chariots of Fire, was an important part of Jon Anderson's career beyond Yes. Jon and Vangelis began collaborating as a pair in the late 1970s, and their music was defined by a sense of space, meditation, and the fantastic. Abolished were the intricate rock formations. Songs such as I'll Find My Way Home, State of Independence, and The Friends of Mr. Cairo featured Anderson's voice gliding over Vangelis' synthesized soundscapes. Jon found solace here, away from the pressures of trying to fit in with a band or compete for creative control. Take a moment to listen, exhale, and harmonize. While Jon Anderson may not have been the type to dominate the charts, he did explore subconscious territories that few had dared to tread. He defies the prevailing trends in an era where musicians are evaluated based on views and virality. However, his anti-trend stance ensures that he continues to thrive, providing sustenance to those who hold music in higher esteem. Difficulties, confusion, and whispers. Not because he was the band's greatest singer or guitarist, but because no one else ever regarded Yes as a spiritual journey. Jon Anderson was the band's irreplaceable soul for decades. He didn't merely compose music, he constructed an entire universe. Consequently, his downfall was not caused by scandal or the press, but rather by those he had formerly considered brothers. Acute respiratory failure hospitalized Yes frontman Jon Anderson in 2008 while the band was getting ready for a new tour. This was the worst case of asthma he has experienced since he was a child. The physicians told him to lie down for a few months because he was unable to sing or breathe. Anderson took it as a cosmic sign to take stock of himself, as he always did. In order to get well, he said he would temporarily stop touring, hoping the group would be patient until he got back. However, the band wasted no time. The remaining members of Yes, including his lifelong friend and co-founder Chris Squire, chose to go on with the tour without him. Not only that, but they sent in a young vocalist called Benoit David to take Anderson's place, a man whose voice was so similar to Anderson's that it caused a stir the minute he took the stage. Both the meeting and the announcement were unannounced. Jon learned of his replacement through an online source. In a subsequent interview, he stated, "I wasn't leaving the band," his voice quivering. "While I was in the hospital, I was kicked out. In all my years, nothing has ever broken my heart more than that." Being abandoned by his musical family was an act of pure betrayal for someone whose life was guided by intuition. Anderson no longer speaks about Yes as a cohesive group. Individual members are the only ones he brings up, with the air of framed recollections. By the time Chris Squire died away in 2015, their relationship had already been irreparably damaged, and they had never made up. Plus, very few people know that Jon also had a profoundly private crisis. After his divorce in the early 90s, he fell into a long period of emotional disintegration. He got disoriented, according to his closest pals, without releasing any music and dodging the press as they wander between meditation institutes. Even music was out of his system for a while. For hours on end, he would sit and attempt to sense the air. This led to whispers that he had cut himself off from society, was mentally ill, thought aliens were his creative influences, and was unable to perform because of long-term lung injury. How did Jon feel? He seemed to have grown accustomed to being misunderstood,